A desperate young woman clutches her side, stumbling through hospital doors at midnight. The doctor glances at her lack of insurance and coldly refuses treatment. But when she collapses and a 28-year-old photograph falls from her purse, the impossible truth is about to shatter both their worlds forever. If you enjoy stories about family secrets, unexpected reunions, and the power of forgiveness, feel free to subscribe. It really helps the channel. By the way, let me know in the comments, where are you listening from? The emergency room at Riverside General Hospital hummed with its usual late-night rhythm as Dr. Michael Harrison completed his final rounds of the evening shift. At 52, his once dark hair now showed silver streaks that caught the harsh fluorescent lighting, and his weathered hands moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who had spent 3 decades making life-and-death decisions in the sterile corridors of Cedar Falls, Iowa's only major medical facility. The small farming community rarely provided much excitement, but tonight something felt different in the air. Sarah Martinez, the head night nurse whose calm competence had made her indispensable over the past 12 years, approached him with obvious reluctance written across her face. She carried a clipboard and wore the expression of someone delivering news she knew wouldn't be well received. "Dr. Harrison," she began carefully, her voice barely audible above the steady beeping of monitors and the distant sounds of late-night traffic filtering through the emergency room windows. "We have a situation with a patient who's been waiting in the lobby for nearly 4 hours now. She's a young woman, probably late 20s, presenting with severe abdominal pain that seems to be intensifying." Michael barely glanced up from the medical charts spread across the nurse's station counter, his pen continuing its methodical journey across patient forms as he documented the evening's cases. The routine of paperwork provided a familiar comfort after particularly difficult shifts, and he found himself reluctant to break his concentration. "What's her insurance status, Sarah?" he asked in the weary tone of someone who had asked this question thousands of times before. "Please don't tell me we're dealing with another charity case at this hour of the night." Sarah shifted her weight from one foot to the other, a nervous habit Michael had learned to recognize over their years of working together. "She doesn't have any coverage at all, doctor. She mentioned that she's been traveling across the country for the past several months, looking for work wherever she can find it, and simply couldn't afford monthly insurance premiums on her limited income." The pen stopped moving entirely. Michael's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly as he set down his writing instrument and finally raised his head to meet Sarah's concerned gaze. His blue eyes had acquired the particular hardness that came from years of making difficult decisions in a healthcare system that often forced doctors to choose between compassion and financial reality. "Sarah, you know the hospital policy as well as anyone on this staff," he said, with the cold professionalism that had become his shield against the constant stream of human suffering that passed through these doors. Uninsured patients receive stabilization treatment and immediate transfer to County General Hospital. They have comprehensive charity care programs and the necessary resources to handle these types of cases without compromising our financial stability. In the waiting room, Claire Matthews sat hunched forward in one of the uncomfortable plastic chairs that lined the walls, her blonde hair falling like a curtain around her face as she fought waves of pain that seemed to be growing stronger with each passing hour. At 28, she had the lean build of someone who worked physical jobs and didn't always have enough money for regular meals. But her green eyes held an intelligence and determination that suggested she hadn't always lived this way. Sarah returned to the waiting area with the devastating news that Claire had been dreading since the moment she walked through those automatic doors. "I'm truly sorry, Miss Matthews, but our hospital policy requires that patients without insurance coverage be transferred to County General Hospital for treatment. It's approximately 20 miles from here, but they have programs specifically designed to help people in your financial situation. Claire's face went pale, and not just from the physical pain that was making it increasingly difficult to think clearly. 20 miles? She whispered, her voice breaking slightly. I honestly don't think I can survive a 20-mile ambulance ride feeling like this. The pain has been getting worse for hours, and I'm starting to feel dizzy and nauseous. I understand your concern, and we'll certainly make sure you're as comfortable as possible during transport, Sarah replied, though her professional training couldn't completely mask the sympathy in her voice. The paramedics are very experienced with these types of transfers. As Claire struggled to stand up from the waiting room chair, desperation gave her the courage to make one final plea. Her voice grew stronger, fueled by the kind of determination that comes from having nothing left to lose. Please, wait just one moment, she called out, causing Sarah to pause halfway back to the nurse's station. My father used to work at this hospital years ago, back in the late 90s. His name was Dr. David Matthews. I know it's a long shot, but maybe someone who worked here then might remember him. He always told me that doctors took sacred oaths to help people regardless of their ability to pay. The name David Matthews hit Michael like a physical blow to the chest. His coffee mug slipped from his suddenly nerveless fingers, hitting the floor with a crash that sent ceramic shards skittering across the linoleum and drew startled looks from the few remaining staff members. David Matthews had been more than just a colleague 15 years ago. He had been Michael's mentor, his closest friend, and ultimately the source of the greatest professional shame of his entire career. But this was impossible. David Matthews had never mentioned having a daughter, not in all their years of friendship and professional collaboration. Michael's hands began to shake as memories he had spent over a decade trying to bury suddenly came flooding back to the surface. Forcing himself to maintain some semblance of professional composure, Michael walked slowly toward the waiting area where Claire sat doubled over in obvious agony. When she looked up at him with those startling green eyes, something stirred in the deepest recesses of his memory, though he couldn't quite identify what it was. Miss Matthews, he said formally, his voice carefully controlled despite the emotional turmoil churning beneath the surface. I'm Dr. Harrison, and I did indeed know Dr. David Matthews quite well during our time working together here. However, that personal connection doesn't change our current hospital policies regarding patients without insurance coverage. County General Hospital has excellent facilities and programs specifically designed to handle cases exactly like yours. Claire's eyes filled with tears that seemed to come from a place much deeper than physical pain. But Dr. Harrison, I really don't think I can make it another 20 miles. Something is seriously wrong inside me, and I'm genuinely frightened. My father always said that doctors were called to heal people, that it was more than just a job. It was a sacred responsibility. Didn't he teach you anything about that? The accusation cut deeper than Claire could possibly have known, striking directly at wounds that had never properly healed. But Michael had spent years building walls around his heart, and he wasn't about to let them crumble now, especially not for someone claiming to be the daughter of David Matthews. Your father was indeed a good man and an excellent physician, Michael replied stiffly. However, County General Hospital is fully equipped to provide you with the care you need. We'll arrange for immediate transport to ensure your safety during the journey. 2 orderlies appeared as if summoned by his words, wheeling a transport gurney toward Claire's chair. She tried to stand on her own, clutching her worn leather purse against her side. But the sudden movement proved to be too much for her weakened condition. The waiting room began to spin violently around her, and she pitched forward, unconscious before she hit the floor. Her purse flew open as she fell, spilling its meager contents across the emergency room's polished linoleum. Among the scattered items, a tube of drugstore lipstick, car keys attached to a faded keychain, crumpled gas station receipts, loose change, and a few wadded-up dollar bills. A single photograph landed face-up directly in front of Michael's feet. Time seemed to stop completely as he stared down at an image that made his breath catch in his throat and his heart begin to race. The photograph showed a much younger version of himself, probably no more than 24 years old, holding a laughing baby girl who couldn't have been more than 6 months old. Christmas decorations twinkled in the background, and both the young man and the infant were wearing matching red sweaters that someone had obviously knitted with love. With hands that trembled uncontrollably, Michael bent down and picked up the photograph, turning it over with growing disbelief and recognition. Written in faded blue ink, in the careful handwriting he had once known as well as his own, were the words that would change everything. Daddy and Claire, Christmas 1996, our first Christmas together as a family. All my love forever, Rebecca. The emergency room seemed to tilt and spin around him as the impossible truth crashed over him like a tidal wave. 28 years ago, he had been married to Rebecca Matthews, a brilliant young nurse who had kept her maiden name for professional reasons. They had been deeply in love and had welcomed a beautiful daughter into their world, a perfect baby girl they had named Claire. But Rebecca had disappeared one snowy February night when Claire was just 8 months old, taking their daughter and leaving only a brief note saying she needed to start over somewhere new. Despite years of desperate searching, hiring expensive private investigators, and following every lead no matter how remote, Michael had never found any trace of them. Now his lost daughter lay unconscious on the emergency room floor of his own hospital, and he had been coldly turning her away. The operating room's bright surgical lights cast everything in stark white as Michael scrubbed his hands with methodical precision, each movement automatic despite the emotional earthquake that had just shattered his world. Claire lay unconscious on the operating table, her appendix dangerously close to rupturing according to the emergency scans. Sarah assisted him with the same quiet efficiency she had shown for years, but she could sense something profoundly different about Dr. Harrison tonight. "Her vitals are stable for now," Sarah reported, adjusting the IV drip that was keeping Claire hydrated and pain-free. "But doctor, I've never seen you look so shaken. Are you sure you're okay to perform this surgery?" Michael's hands paused for just a moment over the surgical instruments. How could he explain that he was about to operate on the daughter he had lost 28 years ago? The child whose absence had haunted every Christmas morning, every Father's Day, every moment of quiet reflection. Instead, he simply nodded and began the procedure that would save Claire's life. As he worked with practiced skill, memories flooded back unbidden. Rebecca's laugh as she fed baby Claire her first solid foods, the way Claire had gurgled with delight when he sang silly songs during diaper changes, the perfect weight of her tiny body sleeping against his chest during those precious late-night feedings when the whole world seemed to belong to just the three of them. But as Michael carefully exposed Claire's inflamed appendix, his trained eye caught something that made his blood run cold. Along her lower abdomen, barely visible beneath the surgical draping, were several old scars, thin white lines that spoke of previous medical procedures. One looked like an emergency appendectomy scar, but it was jagged and poorly healed, the kind of work done in a desperate situation without proper resources. Sarah. he whispered, his voice tight with controlled rage. Look at these old surgical scars. This isn't her first appendicitis. Someone operated on her before and they did a terrible job. Sarah leaned closer, her experienced eye taking in the evidence of medical neglect. My God, Michael. She must have been just a child when this happened. Who would let a little girl suffer like this? The answer hit Michael like a physical blow. Rebecca had run away with no money, no insurance, no support system. When Claire had gotten sick as a child, desperate and frightened, Rebecca must have taken her to some back alley clinic or overworked emergency room where they had patched her up without proper care or follow-up. His daughter had suffered because he hadn't been there to protect her. His hands shook with suppressed emotion as he completed the surgery. This time doing it right, with all the skill and care that Claire should have received as a child. Each suture was perfect, each cut precise and healing. He wouldn't fail her again. 3 hours later, Claire awakened slowly in the recovery room, her mind foggy from anesthesia and pain medication. The first thing she saw was a tall figure in a white coat standing by her bedside, reviewing her chart with intense concentration. When he noticed her eyes were open, he approached with professional courtesy that somehow felt warmer than the coldness she remembered from their first encounter. Miss Matthews, I'm Dr. Harrison, he said gently, not revealing their true connection. You've just had emergency appendectomy surgery. You're going to be fine, but it was a very close call. A few more hours, and we might have been dealing with a much more serious situation. Claire's voice came out as barely a whisper, her throat dry from the breathing tube. Thank you for saving me. I thought you said you couldn't treat patients without insurance. Michael's jaw tightened with guilt and self-recrimination. Sometimes exceptions are made for life-threatening emergencies. The important thing is that you're safe now. As the pain medication began to wear off, Claire's mind became clearer, and she found herself studying the doctor's face more carefully. Something about his eyes seemed familiar, though she couldn't place where she might have seen them before. Dr. Harrison, you said you knew my father? What was he like? I never really got to know him. The question pierced Michael's heart like a blade. Here was his daughter, asking a stranger to describe the father who had been searching for her for nearly 3 decades. David Matthews was a good man, he said carefully, each word chosen with precision. He was dedicated to his patients and believed deeply in helping others. He would have been very proud of the strong woman you've become. Claire's eyes filled with tears, but they seemed to come from a place deeper than gratitude for the surgery. I grew up in foster care after my mother died when I was 15. I've been searching for any information about my father, hoping to find some medical records or family history. I've been having health problems lately, and doctors keep asking about genetic factors I can't provide. The revelation hit Michael like another shock wave. Rebecca was dead. She had been gone for 13 years, and he had never known. All those years of wondering if she was happy, if she had found what she was looking for when she ran away, and she had been gone all this time. I'm very sorry for your loss, he managed to say, though the words felt inadequate for the magnitude of what he was feeling. Your mother was a remarkable woman. You knew her too? Claire asked with surprise, struggling to sit up despite the post-surgical pain. I knew them both, years ago, Michael replied, fighting to keep his voice steady. They were special people. Claire reached into the small bag of personal belongings that Sarah had placed on her bedside table. Before she died, my mother left me a letter. She said it would explain everything about my father and why we had to leave him. but I've never had the courage to open it. I guess I was afraid of what I might find. Michael's heart hammered against his ribs as Claire pulled out a sealed envelope, yellowed with age and worn from being carried for 13 years. The handwriting on the outside was unmistakably Rebecca's, and it was addressed simply to "My darling Claire." Meanwhile, 2 floors up in the hospital cafeteria, the morning shift was just beginning, and with it came the inevitable gossip that fueled small-town institutions like Riverside General. Margaret Foster, the stern hospital administrator who had run the business side of the facility for over 20 years, sat across from Betty Chen, who owned Murphy's Diner on Main Street and served as the unofficial information hub for all of Cedar Falls. "I'm telling you, Betty, something very strange happened last night," Margaret said in a low voice, glancing around to make sure they weren't overheard. Dr. Harrison performed emergency surgery on an uninsured patient. In 15 years of working with that man, I have never seen him make an exception to hospital policy. Not once. Betty's eyes lit up with the kind of curiosity that had made her diner the epicenter of local news and rumors for 3 decades. That is unusual for Michael. He's always been strictly by the books when it comes to hospital policies. What made this case different? "That's what I'd like to know," Margaret replied, stirring her coffee with agitated movements. The patient was a young woman, maybe late 20s, blonde hair, no family in the area. She claimed her father used to work here, some doctor named David Matthews. The coffee mug slipped from Betty's hands, clattering against the table and sending liquid splashing across the surface. Her face had gone pale, and her hands were trembling as she reached for napkins to clean up the spill. "Betty, what's wrong?" Margaret asked with alarm. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Betty's voice came out as barely a whisper, filled with the weight of secrets she had carried for nearly 3 decades. "Margaret, I remember David Matthews, but more importantly, I remember his wife Rebecca and their baby daughter. That little girl's name was Claire." Betty Chen's revelation hung in the hospital cafeteria air like a thunderclap waiting to break. Margaret Foster stared at her friend with wide eyes, the implications of what she had just heard slowly sinking in. If the patient's name was Claire and her father was David Matthews, then the young woman currently recovering from surgery might be connected to one of Cedar Falls's most painful medical scandals. "Betty, are you absolutely certain about this?" Margaret whispered, leaning across the table. "You're talking about something that happened almost 30 years ago. How can you be so sure?" Betty's weathered hands shook as she mopped up the spilled coffee, her mind racing back through decades of carefully guarded secrets. "Because I was the one who helped Rebecca Matthews pack her car that February night in 1997. She came to my diner at 2 a.m, crying and desperate, with that beautiful baby girl in her arms." The memory came flooding back with crystal clarity. Rebecca had been exhausted, heartbroken, and terrified, but she had been absolutely determined to leave Cedar Falls before sunrise. She had begged Betty not to tell anyone which direction she was heading, and Betty had kept that promise for over a quarter-century. She was running from something, Margaret. Something that had broken her heart so completely that she was willing to give up everything she had ever known just to get away from this town. And now her daughter has come back, right here to the same hospital where it all began. Meanwhile, back in Claire's recovery room, the tension was becoming almost unbearable as she held her mother's unopened letter with trembling hands. Michael stood frozen by her bedside, knowing that whatever Rebecca had written in that letter would either explain everything or destroy any chance he might have of reconnecting with his daughter. "Dr. Harrison," Claire said quietly, her voice still weak from the surgery but filled with determination. "Would you mind staying while I read this? I know it's an unusual request, but you're the only person I've met who actually knew both of my parents. I think I might need someone here who can help me understand what my mother was trying to tell me." Michael's throat felt dry as desert sand, but he managed to nod. "Of course, if that would help you." Claire's fingers worked carefully at the aged envelope, trying not to tear the paper that had become brittle after 13 years. Finally, she unfolded the letter and began to read aloud, her voice growing stronger as she discovered the truth her mother had hidden for so long. "My dearest Claire, if you are reading this letter, then I am gone and you are old enough to understand why I made the choices I did. Your father, Michael Harrison, was not David Matthews, as I let everyone believe. David was a kind colleague who helped me create new identities when I knew I had to leave Cedar Falls to protect you." Michael's knees nearly buckled as the truth hit him like a physical blow. Claire was reading the words that revealed he was her father, but she didn't realize it yet. She continued reading, her voice growing more confused with each sentence. "Michael Harrison was a brilliant doctor, and I loved him more than life itself, but he was already married when I met him, already had a family that he couldn't abandon. When I discovered I was pregnant with you, I knew I couldn't destroy his career or his marriage by revealing our relationship." Claire's hands began to shake as the implications of what she was reading became clear. "Your father never knew about you, my darling daughter. I made the choice to disappear because I believed it was better for everyone if he never found out he had another child. But you deserve to know that you were created from love, even if that love couldn't survive in the real world." The letter slipped from Claire's nerveless fingers as she turned to stare at Michael with dawning recognition and horror. "Dr. Harrison," she whispered, "your first name is Michael, isn't it?" Michael couldn't speak. He could only nod as tears began to stream down his face. 28 years of grief and loss finally breaking through the professional barriers he had built around his heart. "You're him," Claire said, her voice barely audible. "You're my father. The man who refused to treat me because I didn't have insurance is my own father." The heart monitors began beeping frantically as Claire's blood pressure spiked from shock and emotional trauma. Sarah rushed into the room, immediately recognizing a medical crisis in progress. But she stopped short when she saw both Claire and Michael crying. "What's happening here?" Sarah demanded, moving quickly to check Claire's vital signs while trying to assess the situation. "He's my father," Claire sobbed, pointing at Michael with a shaking hand. "My mother's letter says he's my father, and he knew it when he refused to help me. He was going to let me die rather than break his precious hospital policy." Michael found his voice at last, though it came out broken and raw with emotion. "Claire, I swear to you, I didn't know. When your mother left, she took you and disappeared completely. I spent years searching for you both, hiring investigators, following every lead. I never stopped looking for my daughter." "But the letter says you were married to someone else," Claire accused, her pain and confusion evident in every word. "It says my mother was protecting me from the scandal of being your illegitimate child. How do I know you're telling the truth now?" Before Michael could respond, another voice cut through the emotional chaos in the room. "Because he's been looking for you for 28 years, and he never gave up hope that someday he would find you." Everyone turned toward the doorway where Emma Harrison Cole stood, her face pale with shock, but her voice steady with conviction. At 32, Emma had inherited her father's strong jawline and her mother's dark hair, and she wore the conservative business suit of a hospital administrator. But right now, she looked like a woman whose entire world had just been turned upside down. "Emma," Michael whispered, realizing that his acknowledged daughter had heard enough of the conversation to understand what was happening. "I can explain everything." Emma stepped into the room, her eyes moving between her father and the young woman in the hospital bed, who was apparently her half-sister. "I've been standing in the hallway for the past 10 minutes, listening to everything, and I think it's time for some honesty in this family." Claire stared at Emma with growing recognition. This woman had the same eyes as Michael, the same determined set to her jaw. "You're his other daughter, aren't you? The legitimate one who got to grow up with a father while I was shuffled through foster homes." "Yes, I'm his daughter," Emma replied quietly. "But there's something else you need to know about why he's been so desperate to find you. Something that makes this reunion even more complicated than you realize." The room fell silent except for the steady beeping of medical equipment as Emma struggled with how to reveal the final secret that would either bring this fractured family together or tear them apart forever. "Dad has end-stage kidney disease," Emma said finally. "He needs a transplant within the next 6 months, or he's going to die. And the only potential donor match we've been able to identify is someone with his exact genetic profile. Someone like a biological child he's never been able to find." Claire's face went white as the full implications hit her. Her father had been searching for her not just out of love or guilt, but because he needed her to save his life. The reunion she had dreamed of her entire life was actually a medical necessity, disguised as paternal devotion. The silence in Claire's hospital room stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Emma's revelation about their father's kidney disease hung in the air, while Claire processed the devastating truth that her long-awaited reunion was actually a medical emergency disguised as paternal love. Michael stood frozen between his two daughters, watching 28 years of hope crumble into suspicion and betrayal. "So that's what this is really about?" Claire said, her voice hollow with disillusionment. "You weren't looking for me because you missed your daughter. You were hunting for a spare kidney." "Claire, that's not true," Michael protested desperately. "Yes, I need a transplant, but finding you has always been about..." "About what?" Claire cut him off, struggling to sit up despite the post-surgical pain. "About love? About family? Or about finding a genetic match who could save your life?" Emma stepped closer to the bed, her administrative training kicking in as she tried to mediate between her father and this sister she'd never known existed. "Claire, I understand why you're angry, but you need to hear the whole truth. Dad has been searching for you since before he even knew he was sick. The kidney disease was diagnosed only 2 years ago." 2 years. Claire's eyes flashed with bitter understanding. "So for 26 years, I didn't matter enough to find. But suddenly when he needs an organ donor, the search becomes urgent." Michael's face crumpled with the weight of her accusation. "That's not how it happened. I never stopped looking for you, not for a single day. Ask anyone in this hospital. Ask Sarah. Ask the private investigators I hired. Ask the missing persons databases I contacted every month for decades." The heart monitor's beeping intensified as Claire's emotional distress triggered a physical response. Sarah rushed back into the room, immediately recognizing the signs of post-surgical complications combined with severe psychological trauma. "Everyone needs to leave this room immediately," Sarah ordered, with the authority of someone who had managed medical crises for 20 years. "This patient is showing signs of dangerous stress elevation. that could compromise her surgical recovery. "I'm not leaving," Michael said firmly. "She's my daughter, and we're going to work through this." "Your daughter who doesn't want you here," Claire shot back, tears streaming down her face. "Your daughter who spent 13 years in foster care while you lived comfortably with your real family. Your daughter who nearly died tonight because you thought hospital policies were more important than human compassion." Emma moved to stand beside Michael, and for the first time, Claire could see the family resemblance clearly. The stubborn set of their jaws, the determined glint in their eyes, the way they both instinctively protected what they loved. "Claire," Emma said quietly, "I know this is overwhelming, but there's something else you should understand. When Dad talks about you, when he's thought no one was listening, he doesn't talk about needing a donor. He talks about the daughter who should have had birthday parties and Christmas mornings and bedtime stories. He talks about all the moments he missed, and it breaks his heart every single time." The raw honesty in Emma's voice cut through Claire's anger like a blade, exposing the deeper wound underneath. "But he had you," she whispered. "He had a daughter to love and raise and be proud of. Why would he need me when he already had a perfect family?" "Because you can't replace one child with another," Michael said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Emma is precious to me, but she was never a substitute for the daughter I lost. There has been a Claire-shaped hole in my heart for 28 years, and nothing, not work, not other relationships, not even raising Emma, has ever filled that space." Sarah checked Claire's vitals again, noting with professional concern that her blood pressure remained dangerously elevated. "Dr. Harrison, I'm sorry, but I have to insist that we limit visitors until the patient stabilizes. This level of emotional stress could cause serious complications." "Wait," Claire said suddenly, her voice cutting through the medical discussions. "Before anyone leaves, I need to know something. Emma, when you found out about me just now, what was your first reaction? Were you angry that your father had been hiding a secret daughter? Were you worried about sharing your inheritance or your position in his life?" Emma considered the question carefully, understanding that her answer might determine whether this fractured family could ever heal. "My first reaction was relief," she said honestly. "For 32 years, I've watched my father carry a sadness that nothing seemed to touch. I've seen him stare at photographs of babies in the pediatric ward with a longing that broke my heart. I've watched him volunteer for every Christmas shift so he wouldn't have to pretend to be completely happy during family celebrations." Claire's expression softened slightly as Emma continued. "When I heard your voice in this room talking about foster care and searching for your father, I didn't feel threatened or angry. I felt grateful that maybe, finally, the missing piece of our family might have come home." The words hung in the air like a bridge spanning 28 years of separation and pain. Claire looked from Emma to Michael, seeing past her anger to the genuine anguish in her father's eyes, not the calculated desperation of someone seeking an organ donor, but the raw grief of a parent who had lost his child. "Dr. Harrison," she said formally, testing the boundaries of their relationship, "if I decide to get tested as a potential kidney donor, would you want that to be because I'm your daughter, or because I'm a compatible genetic match?" Michael's answer came without hesitation. "I would want you to make that choice because you believe in forgiveness and family, not because you feel obligated by genetics or guilty about my medical condition. If you decide you can't forgive me for the circumstances of your birth or for not finding you sooner, I'll accept that decision and find another way to deal with my health problems. And if the test shows we're not compatible? Claire pressed. If I can't save your life medically, would you still want me in it? Claire, Michael said, stepping closer to her bedside, I would rather have one day with you as my daughter, knowing I might die tomorrow, than live 20 more years without ever seeing you again. The kidney transplant is about survival, but finding you is about finally being whole. Sarah had been quietly monitoring the conversation while keeping a professional eye on Claire's medical status. Now she noticed something that made her smile, despite the emotional intensity of the situation. Claire, your blood pressure is actually stabilizing as you talk through this with your family. Sometimes the heart knows what the mind needs to hear. Emma moved to the other side of Claire's bed, her voice gentle but determined. Claire, I don't know if this helps, but I want you to know that I've never felt like I had to compete for Dad's love. He's always made it clear that love multiplies. It doesn't divide. Having you in our lives wouldn't take anything away from what we have. It would make our family complete. Claire closed her eyes for a long moment, feeling the weight of 28 years of questions, anger, and longing pressing against her chest. When she opened them again, she looked directly at Michael with a clarity that surprised even herself. I want to get tested, she said quietly. Not because I owe you anything, and not because I'm ready to forgive everything that happened, but because I need to know who I am when I'm not defined by abandonment and foster care. I need to know what it feels like to choose family instead of having it chosen for me. Michael's eyes filled with tears of relief and gratitude. Claire, that means more to me than you could possibly know. But, Claire continued, her voice growing stronger, I need time to understand what forgiveness means and what kind of relationship we can build together. And I need to know that if I do this, it's because I want to save my father's life. Not because I'm trying to earn love I should have had all along. Emma reached across the bed and gently took Claire's hand. Whatever you decide, and however long it takes, you have a sister who wants to know you. Not because of medical compatibility or family obligations, but because I've been waiting my whole life to meet the person who could make my father's eyes light up the way they did when he found that photograph. 3 months later, the morning sun streamed through the windows of Riverside General's family lounge, where Claire sat reading a letter from the transplant coordinator. Michael was scheduled for surgery the following week, and the compatibility tests had confirmed what they had all hoped. Claire was indeed a perfect match, not just genetically, but in ways that went far beyond medicine. Emma found her there, dressed in the business suit she wore for her hospital administrative duties, but her face showed the soft happiness of someone whose family had finally found its missing piece. The final pre-surgery tests came back normal, Emma reported, settling into the chair beside her sister. Dr. Patterson says both you and Dad are cleared for the transplant procedure. Claire folded the letter and smiled, an expression that had become more frequent as she learned to trust in the love that had been waiting for her all along. I keep thinking about what Mom wrote in that letter about protecting me from scandal. She thought she was saving me from something shameful, but maybe she was just afraid of something beautiful. Michael appeared in the doorway, looking healthier than he had in months, thanks to the dialysis treatments that were keeping him stable until the surgery. But more importantly, he looked happier than Emma could ever remember seeing him. My two favorite people, he said, settling into a chair across from his daughters. I have something I want to give you both. He pulled out a small wrapped package and handed it to Claire. Inside was a silver locket, tarnished with age but carefully polished. When Claire opened it, she found two tiny photographs, one of herself as a baby and one of Emma at the same age. "I've carried this for 28 years, Michael explained. "I always hoped that someday I'd be able to give it to you when our family was complete." Claire's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of healing rather than pain. "Dad," she said, using the word intentionally for the first time since their reunion. "Thank you for never giving up on finding me." Emma reached over and took both their hands, creating a circle that felt as natural as breathing. "So what happens after the surgery?" she asked. "I mean, what happens to our family?" Michael looked at his daughters, one who had grown up knowing she was loved, and one who was learning to trust in that love for the first time, and felt a peace he hadn't experienced since that terrible night when Rebecca had disappeared with baby Claire. "What happens is that we have the rest of our lives to be the family we were always meant to be," he said simply. "We have birthdays to celebrate and holidays to share and all the ordinary moments that make a life meaningful." Claire nodded, finally understanding that forgiveness wasn't about forgetting the past or pretending the pain hadn't been real. It was about choosing love over anger, hope over bitterness, and family over the fear of being hurt again. As the three of them sat in the morning sunlight, planning for a future they would face together, the missing piece of the Harrison family puzzle clicked into place at last, creating a picture of love that had survived separation, misunderstanding, and 28 years of waiting to be complete.